Good evening. I'm Jen Armstrong, the Director of Alumni Engagement at Monmouth College. Welcome to Social Justice in Action, Scots Fighting for Change, presented by the Monmouth College Alumni Association and the Monmouth Intercultural Network of Alumni. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists tonight, Charles Burton, class of 1992, and Jeff Rankin, Monmouth's college editor and favorite historian. Before I begin, I want to cover some housekeeping items. This event is recorded and it'll be available on the Monmouth College website next week. For the best viewing experience during the presentation, please ensure that you are on speaker mode, which can be selected in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Attendees can ask questions for the panelists using the chat feature on the screen. We will read and answer as many of those questions as we can at the end of today's presentation. Also, at the end of today's event, you'll see a short 3-minute survey appear in your web browser. Please feel free to use the survey to offer your feedback and suggestions for future events. Jeff Rankin is the editor of the Monmouth Magazine and our college historian. He has his BA from St. Lawrence University, and he claims that the only reason he didn't go to Monmouth was because his twin brother Doug came to Monmouth and it was his show of rebellion. He's worked in communications at Monmouth since 1992. And his father, Glenn Rankin, class of 43, I love this little factoid, still holds the record for the longest punt in Fighting Scots history at 92 yards. So, wow. He went on to a long career in Monmouth at admissions and development. Along with Jeff's dad and brother, his wife, Terry, and daughter, Amanda, also graduated from Monmouth. And Jeff received Monmouth's Distinguished Service Award last fall for all that he does for Monmouth. We are proud to have him here with us tonight to recap Monmouth's history of civil rights activism. Charles Burton, class of 92, is a bivocational pastor. He currently serves as pastor of the Unity Fellowship Church in Godfrey, Illinois, and is the Chief Human Resources Officer of the St. Louis Public Schools. Charles Burton's academic credentials include a Juris Doctorate from Washington University School of Law, a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and in Philosophy from Monmouth. And while at Monmouth, Charles served 2 terms as president of the student body, earned 9 All-American honors in track and field, and a national championship in the 400-meter hurdles. Charles Burton was admitted to the Missouri Bar in 1998, and he is a proud product of the St. Louis Public Schools, where he currently serves as Chief Human Resources Officer. Excuse me. So now I'm going to hand over the show to Jeff to get us started.
Thank you, Jen. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you fellow Scots out there, as always. This is an interesting historical topic, and it's a little hard to condense the history of activism at Monmouth College into about 10 minutes. I'm just going to highlight a few things that I think were significant in our history, which is a long and rich history. As you know, Monmouth College was founded in 1853 as an academy, in 1856 as a college. And this was at a critical time in our nation's history. The Kansas-Nebraska Act had been passed in 1854. There was vigorous debate about allowing slavery into the new territories. And of course, in 1858, we had the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. And Monmouth, while it did not host a debate between Lincoln and Douglas, both of them spoke here that October. And so there was a great deal of interest in debating. And those weren't the only 2 debaters that fall, but Monmouth students wanted to stage their own Lincoln-Douglas debate. There was a problem with that because Monmouth, unlike Galesburg, which was founded by abolitionists, and Knox College was founded by abolitionists, Monmouth actually had a pretty strong democratic base. And so President David Wallace, our first president, had to be politically careful in political matters. So he was not in favor of doing some sort of a public debate with Monmouth College students. So they surreptitiously arranged to have a debate in nearby Little York, which is a few miles northwest of Monmouth. And they could only find about 3 students who supported the Douglas platform of popular sovereignty. And so but they got several students to agree to support, to cheer and sing for Douglas. Anyway, the entire town of Little York turned out for this event, and it was a big deal. And then the next day, people came to David Wallace's office and told him, the terrible thing that his students had done in doing this activism, and behind his back. Well, he did some checking and found out what it was all about, and he laughed about it. So that was one of the first things that happened. As you know, most of Monmouth male students did enlist in the Civil War. And Monmouth, because it had co-ed students from the beginning, was able to survive because of that. So really, most of Monmouth students in those days were Republicans and favored and were anti-slavery. But there were still issues. And at the opening of the fall 1868 classes, a young Black man enrolled in Monmouth, and he was received by the professors and placed in classes, but it caused a stir, and several students actually left school because of it. And he was about to leave himself as a result, but the faculty prevailed upon him to remain, and he did. And the editor of the Monmouth Atlas at the time wrote, "So far as the authorities of the college are concerned, as they are Christian men and the institution under their control is conducted on Christian principles, we conclude there has been no time in its history when a respectable colored student would not have been admitted had application been made." So, it was a tough time, but early on, President Wallace was very supportive of the Black community in Monmouth. He helped them establish the first African church in Monmouth, and hired the janitor for the college was actually a Civil War veteran, a Black man. So there were some early Black students at Monmouth. The problem we have right now, and it requires a lot of historical research, is that we have names of all of our previous students, but we have no information on their race. So trying to figure out who might have been Black students is a tough thing. It's something we're kind of in the middle of trying to discover. And right now, particularly because we are about to dedicate a new center on campus called the Champion Miller Center for Equity, Inclusion, and Community. And this is sort of the result of a fund that was established along these lines. And Champion Miller is a man that we are now trying to study deeply. He was a former slave from Kentucky, came to Monmouth as a young man, was able to purchase his own freedom after his master died. And then he was able to purchase the freedom of his wife and a son in Missouri, and settled in Monmouth and became a very upstanding citizen, was a member of the Presbyterian Church. And he also had a brother who belonged to another master, had a different name, but was also a prominent farmer in the area. So we were trying to connect the dots on Champion Miller. The thing about him was he was taught to read and write by a student at the Theological Seminary here in Monmouth that was affiliated with the Presbyterian Church. And so that sort of educational aspect, along with the historical aspect, is something that we're really interested in. Now, going into the 20th century, you're familiar with the progressive era and Theodore Roosevelt. Most Monmouth students and faculty were supporters of Teddy Roosevelt. He was somewhat of a racist in many ways. He believed in the superiority of the white race, but he did also support people of color who had achieved. He invited Booker T. Washington to the White House. So, but this was a very common thing in the Midwest at the time, to sort of be open to inclusion, but also a lot of the white population thinking that they had this superiority. Um, really, the next point in our history, when a lot of the civil rights protests started happening, involved a really interesting professor by the name of Carl Gamer. Some of you may have had him, and he was a government professor, and he put out an ad in the local paper in 1962, and he said, as the son of a Civil War veteran whose father answered President Lincoln's call for help to free this nation of slavery, I've always been interested in the Africans in our midst who were among the first Americans to be brought to this country. And Professor Gamer led an effort to construct a new AME church here in Monmouth. And he was very active in the civil rights movement. He toured the South in the summer of '63, 10 southern states, trying to determine the causes of injustice down there. But he was also involved in a very interesting incident in our history, which is known as the barbershop incident. And this occurred in about the same time in 1963. And there were students, we had 4 Black students that fall, 1 from Kenya, and we had 3 from Chicago. 2 of them were male. One of them was an alum by the name of Kennedy King, who got very active in this. And there was a problem in Monmouth. There were no local barbers that would cut the hair of African Americans. And they claimed it was because they didn't have the ability, they didn't have the equipment or the knowledge and that sort of thing. It all came to a head because there was a feeling that it was really maybe because they were afraid they would lose their white customers if they cut the hair of Black patrons. So this got really wrapped up in the college. Professor Gamer contacted the state of Illinois licensing to ask if barbers had to be able to cut all people's hair. He was told that sort of is the case when they get licensed. And then this got pushed out to the Chamber of Commerce. And then all of a sudden, all the barbers, almost 15 barbers, became incensed with this. And they filed suit. There was like a suit and a countersuit. And they were called to Springfield to be called on account. Kennedy King, along with 2 white students, went to barbershops in Monmouth and demanded to have his hair cut. They wouldn't do it, and that's kind of what triggered it. The state actually did respond and say, yeah, we have to do something about this, but nothing really ever happened, which is interesting. So that was a key time. And then when the civil rights movement really took off about the mid '60s, we had a chaplain by the name of Paul McClanahan, who many of you probably remember. He was just an amazing man. He started taking groups of Monmouth College students to the inner city of Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis. He took one, and this would be like over Christmas break, for 5 days. He took one group to Chicago where they met with Mayor Daley, they met with the police commissioner, they met with Jesse Jackson, and really got an inside look at what was going on. They went to Detroit where the riots had been in the summer of '66, I believe, and they went into the burned out district and tried to see what had happened there. And so McClanahan was a real force during that time. He also helped with this convocation program. And one of the highlights of that was a Black Power conference held in the spring of '68. And at that, they brought in some big names. Dick Gregory spoke before 1,500 people in the gym, mostly white audience. And he basically, said that there's something wrong with the society where Martin Luther King is hated and killed, but General Westmoreland is loved and honored. And actually, much of the audience gave him, rounds of applause. Um, Also, William Worthy was another speaker that year. He was a man who rejected the idea that elections could be a means for change. He called election a fraud. And James Farmer, the Freedom Ride organizer and founder of CORE, also spoke. And he also came back to campus in 1971 after he had served as assistant director of HEW under Nixon. 1970, the Black Action Affairs Council was formed. And by 1972, they had started doing a Black Expo week. And this would continue every year until 1984. In 1978, they brought Bobby Seale, one of the founders of the Black Panthers, to campus. I think some of you were probably there for that. Now, by 1980, less than 2% of the student body was minority, and that was a problem. And people were trying to do something about that. There was a African American alumni network formed, trying to encourage admissions to go after more students of color. In 1988, the Hubbard House was donated to the college by the Hubbard family, and this was a center on campus. It was a Center for Cultural Diversity. By 1990, the percentage of minority students had risen to 15%, which was, it was progress. And then in 1995, BAAC became the Minority Affairs Council, MAC. And in 1998, it became the Coalition for Ethnic Awareness, which lasted until 2010. So today, things have improved quite a bit. We have more than a 30% minority population. We are doing things like this new Champion Miller Center, which are very exciting. Long way to go, but we've come a long way, and we're all looking forward to the future of activism at Monmouth. And I guess on that note, I may like to turn it over to Charles Burton, and maybe he can talk a little bit about his experiences as an activist, both fighting for civil rights, fighting for equal opportunity in employment and that sort of thing, as both an attorney and a pastor. So Charles, could you maybe bring up some of the things that have occupied you in the past few years?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Particularly those of you who I know, Eric and Bill for sure. I see you out there. It's good to see you. As I was thinking about this, the first thing I wanted to talk about probably was the fact that, just being an activist is just one way of being a change agent. I think people want to make a difference in the world. There's lots of ways to make a difference in the world. Like you can be a teacher, you can be a political elected official, or some kind of decision maker or superintendent, or if you got a lot of money, you can be a philanthropist and donate money to other people. But activism's a very specific way of making change. And it's about kind of creating or striving to create systemic change by applying external pressure to a system, if you will. And it's typically, kind of a robust campaign. But activism is unique because it's about being outside of the system. Like you can make a difference as a professor, but activists tend to put pressure on systems that they're not necessarily a part of. And this is what I want to talk about. Like my parents were change agents, and I guess they raised me to be change agents. And they're very community minded. My grandparents were sharecroppers on my maternal side, and my paternal side, they were, I guess my grandfather was a pig farmer, but they're very community oriented, very close, hardworking family. Anyway, and so I got involved in some things. When I first came to Monmouth, I realized or the reason I came to Monmouth is important probably to this conversation. And so I tell this story a lot. Steve doesn't remember it, but when I visited Monmouth the first time, I was a state champion in the hurdles, and but I didn't see a coach. I didn't see Coach Haynes or the football coaches or anything. They put me in a room with Steve Boobin, and he asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said, I want to be an engineer. And he said, no, you don't. And I said, you don't know me. And then he says, I know, but I also know you don't know. So do yourself a favor and don't go to some other school and be what other people tell you you ought to be. Come here, let us teach you to think, and you can be anything you want. And that resonated with me in a really powerful way. And then, of course, Dr. Scott was here at the time, was the head of the philosophy department, who's also an AME pastor. And then his wife, Andrea Scott, was the director of minority affairs at the time. And they headed up, or they led BAAC, the group you were talking about there, Jeff. It was a really powerful organization, and we were all told you're going to be a change agent. And then add to that, Iris Malinsky, who was amazing to me, who made me politically aware and supported my efforts there. And so, which all in my mind, not this is the infomercial for Monmouth, but it ties really closely to the Monmouth mission, right? And have you looked at that recently, Jeff? Right? It says in part, right, as a residential liberal arts college, we empower students to realize their full potential, live meaningful lives, pursue successful careers, and shape their communities and the world through service and leadership. And I think that's what a liberal arts education did for me as an inner city kid. In fact, my first sit-in was at Monmouth. We organized it there, me and Kate Francis and some other people, but they wanted to eliminate the position of chaplain. And we're like, no, which is really funny for lots of reasons. And so we organized a sit-in in Wallace Hall, and then we had another sit-in some years later. We actually took over the student centers. So another story. Dean Connon will remember that, not fondly, but she'll remember it. Anyway, but so I got started, I guess, in activism based upon those relationships there in Monmouth and that work. And actually, too, I don't think I'm going to show some pictures, but it's funny, but I in the thing that was kind of the impetus for this, in the protests we did in Ferguson, Cornel West is there, and the first time I met Cornel West was actually on campus at Monmouth too. Dr. Scott had invited him, he came, he spoke. I want to say it was the winter of 90 or the winter of 91, and one of those two, and probably 90, I think, and I had just written a paper for the Associated Colleges of the Midwest on reason, will to power, and racism. And, I got to talk for 20 minutes with Cornel West as a 20-year-old or 19-year-old about my paper, which I'm sure he thought was crap, but, he was very humble and very, very appropriate, very kind, and like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, so it all starts there. And then of course I leave school and I guess I kind of settled into life, and then I became a part of a group which Bill Pyatt is also part of now, called the Gamilio Foundation, which is a grassroots community activist group. They work in like 17 states. They have a chapter in Springfield, in Illinois, in Chicago, up in the Quad Cities, and then in the Metro East here, United Congregations in the Metro East. We go and we train up in, and so I was trained as a community organizer with that group, and it really woke something up in me. I was, I was a pastor, a new pastor, involved in this community organizing work. We did a ton of activist work, even long before Ferguson. We did work organizing around jobs, around ban the box, and political reform, or what do you call it? Criminal justice reform, and those kinds of things. And so one really cool event, I think we all planned, we were trying to get minority participation on what is now called the San Miguel Bridge, which connects like East St. Louis to St. Louis. And as we're working here, we couldn't get IDOT to meet with us. And so we all planned meetings with our state reps in our while they were in session, and our state senators while they were in session in Springfield, as many as we could that day. And we took buses from all over the state to Springfield. We get there and we meet with our people, and then we all kind of, then took over the rotunda and had a prayer visual, and so, guards hate to interrupt people praying, right? And so of course we held our rally as a disguised as a prayer visual, and then when they realized what was happening, they wanted to ask us to leave. So then we went into the governor's office. We all wore these old boots there, and we took off our boots and we left hundreds of pairs of boots in the governor's office, along with cards that said, "Put these boots to work," right? It was a really powerful thing. And then of course, because that's one way, obviously, you can do activism. And then we organized, because it's faith-based, and there are a lot of older people in churches, and we organized all of these retired women and men, and they just called the governor's office every day. Every one of them called the governor's office once a day. Hundreds of people just calling, saying, "Meet with this group." Guess what happened? He met with us, right? Because that's power. Power is organized people, organized money. And so then he required that IDOT find a way to work with us. And so we ended up with close to 40% minority participation in the building of this bridge, which was a big deal. And we met with IDOT probably twice a week leading up to the start of the project. Not twice a week, every 2 weeks, I should say, leading up to the start of the project, because we put pressure on the system. We got a seat at the table with the decision makers. And that's what activism looks like on so many different levels, if you will. That's just one example. And then I did that and those kinds of things for a while. And then, of course, August 9th, 2014, Darren Wilson shot and killed Michael Brown, right here in Ferguson, which is, probably 20 minutes from where I live in St. Louis. And then all hell broke loose, right? And people took to the streets. And, I wasn't equipped really to know how to deal with that initially. And so the first thing, I decided to go probably 2 nights after the Quick Chip burned. We went, friends of ours, and I went with this idea that I was going to help keep the peace. And what happened is I learned how out of touch I was, and how I needed to do something other than sit in the pulpit and even just try to get jobs, even though that's important. And so that first night I'm out there, I'll never forget it. We're trying to keep the peace, but people were really, there's Bloods and Crips, all these gang members out there together, these Bloods and Crips are screaming, we are, we never, we don't agree on anything, but we're here together. We ain't fighting each other. We're here for one purpose, to get justice. And there was a powerful moment for somebody who grew up in the inner city dealing with the challenges created by the Crips. And then I met this kid as it was the first night they had imposed a curfew, and all of the police were there and the riot gear and everything. And, it was mainly peaceful protest. The Muslims were super, and at least the Muslims were super organized in their protest and just really together. Was really gained a lot of respect for a lot of people because of how organized they were. And so we're trying to encourage people to go home at the end. It's like 11:45, curfew's midnight. Like, hey, we want to get out of here. And so I go to this younger brother, he's probably 27, 28. And I say, hey, he's sitting there, and then he's on a BMX bike. You can imagine, he's almost 30 years old. He's on a BMX bike. He's got this, he's got a bandana around his face, And I say, hey, we're all trying to head out of here, about 10 minutes till or whatever, out of the curfew, and then we'll come back in the morning. He said, man, I ain't going nowhere. And I said, well, we should, we just, we want to do this right. We want to apply pressure, but, we don't want to. He said, no, I ain't going nowhere, man. And I said, there's nothing you can do after midnight other than, just, make things worse. These police are edgy, they're popping tear gas. They're edgy, you don't want to, you're going to be putting your life at risk, we don't want anybody else to die. He said, man, you talking about dying? He says, we dying out here for walking across the street, right? So what are you saying? And I was like, well, so then, I'm trying to be an intellectual. And so I say to this young man, I said, well, I said, James Baldwin. And he says, James Baldwin, how the F old are you? Right? So then I say, well, then I say, well, we're only destroying, our own property, right? He says, our own property, man, we don't own none of this crap, man. This ain't ours. He didn't say crap, right? He said, and then he started pointing at these buildings. Like he said, corporation, corporation, error, right? That's what he says, right? He says, like, we don't own any of this. This isn't ours. He's like, man, we're being occupied here. And then, and so it was powerful for me because I realized like I don't have words for this guy. Turns out, he had done really well in school, in high school. He got accepted to WashU. He went to WashU for a couple of years. He ran out of money, couldn't stay, ended up becoming a contractor, couldn't get in the union because he was. And so I realized, right, that in all of my doing with my JD and all that I was trying to do in the world, that I hadn't been in the streets, that I hadn't been connected to people like this guy whose story was so compelling, who needed a voice, and the reason he was in the street, and the reason so many of them were there, and his story was repeated over and over again, because they were just so frustrated about the lack of access and the lack of voice. And so then we decided, we were going to do something. And so we're there all these nights trying to get something up. And then we planned a big, I don't know what you call it, protest or visual, a Moral Monday, October 13th, 2014 is a big day. There's lots of prayer and planning and preparation up front. And I think the prayer part, for me as person faith is a big part of it. A very tactical kind of planning and training, making sure people were equipped. It wasn't just spare the moment. Like those kids who are out there the first few nights, obviously they're protesting, but there's no structure to that. And so we went out there, we planned to come with structure. So with clergy and citizens, we organized our resources. One of the things you teach and organize, as you teach, what do you call it? Community organizing. One of the things we teach is power in America is organize people and organize money, right? And so we organize people, we organize money for the purpose of exercising power to get justice from Mike Brown and get some reform in Ferguson and surrounding cities. So we organize, citizens, of all walks of life. It's multi-generational, multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic, socioeconomically diverse groups of people from all over, not just the city, but from other states, professional community organizers, as well as lay people in churches. And then we also reached out and we organized a bail fund, because you're going to do a big thing, you got to be able to get people out of jail. And then we organized the crowd based upon risk aversion. And so if you think about that, there's some people who can't afford to go to jail, right? Because they got warrants already or whatever else, but they're with you, right? And so you had to have a plan and how to use them. There's some people who, I'm probably gonna lose my job. I can't go either, or I can go to jail, but I'd prefer not to. It's really, really inconvenient. And then there's people like, no, man, I'm going to jail, right? So you figure out who's in your group of all this big crowd, and you kind of layer yourself as you move forward. The plan was to march on, to gather the church, to march on initially. It's like a full day's event, but the morning event was to march on the police department there in Ferguson to engage the police officers there with the march. We had a group of people who had stories to tell, and we organized them and their stories. There were people who had been wronged by the police in that area, right? And we met with the individual people. We paired people with stories with clergy, and as clergy, we would speak to the police officer who were holding the front line and would say, we respect you, and we're glad you're here, but you need to know that this police department has wronged the citizens it's supposed to protect and serve. And so we offer you this opportunity to repent. If I'm getting long, somebody tell me. And so then they would tell their story, say they would be wrong, and we offered the police a chance to repent for the wrong that they'd done to the citizens they were supposed to protect and serve. Of course, none of them accepted those. And then we carved out a space where I laid down to create a monument. I laid down, like Mike Brown laid down on the ground. They outlined my body in chalk for the purpose, and they built a monument there. And then we laid in the ground and we held that spot. It rained all day too. It was awful. And we laid there for, this was 40 minutes to coincide with the 4 hours that Mike Brown's body laid on the ground. And then we pushed the line, and then the people in the front of the line obviously were arrested. And so that was the first part of that. And then later that day we held a rally at St. Louis University, and we invited again, and this is all planning, groups of people, again, planning, preparation, and prayer at the Sabbath Center where the St. Louis Billikens play. Not the Sabbath Center, but anyway, you get the idea. Again, clergy and citizens spoke, make sure there was grassroots voice there. We spoke and declared to the nation, the challenges. What was really interesting, what I learned there, was that people don't care about national personalities at all. What they care about is your presence, like what they want in the context of their suffering. If you're a community organizer, is they just want you to be present and not just show up when the cameras are there. And then the last part of that was after that, we went to right after that, there had been another young man who was killed in St. Louis, Von Derek. We went to the place where he was shot. And then we did this, you'll appreciate this, Jeff, probably. There's a kind of this Battle of Jericho march, right? So we started where his body was, and then a group of marched east, and a group of us marched west, right? And then we came around, we circled up, and then we met at the entrance to St. Louis University. We took over the campus. What was really powerful there is because between the early situation in August when Mike Brown had been killed, and now we've developed these relationships with all these young people, these grassroots people, taught them how to organize and how to protest in ways that were meaningful. And as we're there taking over the campus, the young man who I talked to that first night, who kind of was revolted by my reference to James Baldwin, was holding up a sign at the protest with a James Baldwin quote. And the quote he used was, "Those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by others doing it." Right? And it was really powerful. And so I probably have talked enough, but that's some of my experience around being an activist and community organizing. Maybe there's some other piece to this. Well, maybe I can talk about that later, because I think people may be tired of listening to me and they may have questions. So why don't we open up for questions first, and then I'll tell that other story later, if there aren't enough questions.
Hey, Charles. We do have a question from Bill Pyatt. And he said, how hard is it to get white majority congregations to engage in social activism events?
Oh, I don't know, on a scale of 1 to 10, 12, I guess. And it's funny too, because I'm preaching a series entitled A Letter from a Philippian Jail, looking at Paul and Silas and Acts, and in the parallels of it to Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And part of the issue King's addressing in the letter from a Birmingham jail is just how complacent the church is, and how the church says it's not a good time. This is unwise, it's untimely, and because they're so comfortable. And I think some of that has to do with, I don't want to get too theological, but the de-radicalization of Jesus, right? Like we've made Jesus really polite and sweet and kind and loving and he was loving, and he was kind. He still is loving and kind, right? But he's also is a radical. He's opposed to a lot of things, and I would argue Jesus is a radical feminist, right? I mean, think about like all of the women who are empowered in the early church, right? Think about the fact that the first carrier of the gospel, right, is a woman, right? The first person to carry the message that he's risen. Like we have made Jesus like this protector of the status quo, when the truth is he was everything but. And so I don't know if we want to blame the lay people. Some of it's our theology. We don't talk about how Jesus was asking for change in structures, and how he flips so many structures on their head, even in the context of the church. So that pacifist theology, I think, is the problem. It's not so much people, in my opinion, Bill.
So, Charles, I have a question. I thought it was really interesting what you said about the organization by risk aversion.
Mm-hmm.
It's so smart, so considerate. How did you come up with that in your group?
I don't know, somebody smarter than me, somebody who's done it before, right? Like there's a, because like there's nothing new under the sun. Obviously, there are lots of people. Almost anything you want to do, like I put a starter on my car the other day. I just Googled it, right? It's on YouTube. But in this particular case, I think I have a really good friend who's a pastor in Cincinnati, who's done this work, and it was his idea, which made all the sense in the world. Yeah. But yeah, you realize, and this is maybe to Bill's point too, people are wondering what I could do. And the reason I open with this idea that you can be a change agent in so many ways, and activism is just one of them, because people's level of risk aversion, may keep them from participating in one particular way, or sometimes people's activity. I mentioned before, I hope this is helpful, by the way, but I mentioned before how we had our older members make phone calls to the governor's office, right? We've done the same thing, like in small towns like East St. Louis, trying to get some buildings torn down, right? You just call the mayor's office every day, right? You organize a group of women from 5 different churches, and you've got 50 people who all call the mayor's office every day, literally, because they don't have anything else to do, right? And they say, take this building down, right? And that's activism, that's power. So we all have different abilities and different voices and different limitations, but just whatever you think your limitation is, right? That's also, there's a possibility, there's a way you can get involved. You just have to figure out what you're willing to do, and then organize people and organize money.
So Steve Boobin has a question for you. Are you in touch with the Scots at all still?
I am only on Facebook, and so every once in a while, Dr. Scott responds to my Facebook post. I think I posted a friend of mine singing Aretha Franklin, and he was like, "Woo!" But anyway, and so then we reconnected that way. But it's probably, I don't know if we've talked since the pandemic. It's probably been a while, but he's out there.
We also have a question, which may be more for Regina and I from Desiree. How can alumni be more supportive of students on campus to ensure they have a positive experience? Regina, are you?
Yep, I'm moving, so I'm not going to turn my screen on. But yes, Desiree, I'm Regina Johnson. I'm Director for Multicultural Student Services on campus. Thank you for your question. To become more involved on campus, there are a couple of different ways. Jen and I have forged a really pretty awesome partnership the last year and a half, and been very, very intentional about integrating our alums in our student experiences, especially for our marginalized students. So if there is something that you want to be involved in, or an activity, or you want to participate in a panel discussion, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or to Jen. And what we have started to do is gather basically a database of our marginalized alums who want to re-engage with campus and participate with the student experience. I'll be honest, Charles is an example of that. I solicited Charles's input on a program for young men that we implemented late in the fall, and he has been a huge part of that this year. And so in doing so, I said, hey, Charles, would you like to speak to a larger audience about activism and your passion and where it started on campus? And so he's not only been able to engage with young men on campus, but obviously he's now re-engaging with the larger, Scott community. So please reach out to Jen or I, and we will bring you in with open arms to engage with our students.
Absolutely. Desiree, I just sent you Regina and I's email in the chat. So we have another question from David Jones. As a 62 grad who grew up in Jennings, I especially appreciate your stories about your Ferguson experience. Thank you. So a comment, not a question. Thank you. Let me just look through the chat. Are there any more questions at all as I'm looking? Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions at this point. Before we wrap up, Jeff, Charles, do you have any last words?
Well, I would just say there are many ways that we are hoping to really turn up the volume on activism at Monmouth and to celebrate our heritage. We're looking at a real exciting program. We have our summer Sophia program where students come in for 3 weeks before school starts, and they do intensive research on a topic. And we're hoping that this August we can do one of these things to study the racial history of Monmouth, including Champion Miller's family, hoping to uncover some information. We know where he is buried roughly in Monmouth Cemetery. We do not have the exact location. There's no headstone. So one of the things we would really love to do would be to erect a headstone when we are able to better determine that. Other members of his family are buried there as well without headstones. So some exciting things coming up in the next few months.
We've had a few more questions come in from Vicki Young and Ted. Could you say more about the Gamilio Foundation? I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, Charles.
It's the Gamilio Foundation. Bill was a member of the Sanhedrin. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, so Gamilio was a member of the Sanhedrin. I think it's like Acts chapter 6 or 8. But the early church, they were about to kill the disciples and members of the church. He spoke up and was considered the first advocate for the church. And he said, you remember that guy Michael? He was a rabble rouser. We killed him and his movement died. And then there was that other guy, Joseph, and we killed him and his movement died. And so, now we've killed this guy, Jesus. Let's just see what happens, because if he was like the others, then the movement will die. And if it turns out this is of God, then we don't want to fight against God and let it happen. And so he was the first advocate for the church. And then, of course, obviously the church grew from there, and eventually the church took over Rome. And so the Gamilio Foundation is named after him. It's an advocate organization who has a progressive social justice and agenda that's based upon our reading of the gospel. If you if you've read The Politics of Jesus, you probably have a sense for at least how we show up in the world. It's like in 17 states. There's 4 chapters in Illinois. One's in Chicago. It's Gamilio of Metro Chicago, GMC. That group is the group that Barack Obama worked for when he was a community organizer in South Chicago. There's a group in the Quad Cities, I believe it's called Quad Cities Interfaith. There's a group in Springfield, I believe it's Faith Coalition United. And then there's a group in the Metro East, or on the east side of the river here in the St. Louis area, called United Congregations in the Metro East. And it's all churches typically make up like the vast majority, but there's some unions that are members, as well as some other organizations, but typically faith-based people we organize around jobs, around the environment, around education, around immigration reform, meaningful immigration reform, and around jobs and those kinds of things. It's you can go to Gamilio website, or even to the United Congregations of Metro East website. I was the president of UCN for a while, and we did a number of things. One of the things we did was kind of cool is, well, as a result of that trip we took to Springfield, we actually got the Governor Quinn, to come to East St. Louis, and this huge rallies, like 2,000 people in one of those mega churches, and made a number of different asks and got some things done there. It was kind of cool work. That's a powerful organization. It's been around about they just had the 25th anniversary about 4 years ago. It's been around about 29 years, maybe, I want to say. It's worth looking into. I hope I answered your question.
That's great. A little follow-up quick. Who was governor of Illinois when you went? Who?
Governor Quinn.
Governor Quinn. Okay. And Steve Boogan has another question. Charles, how did you transform from corporate attorney to activist?
So I hated doing commercial transactions, and my wife knew it, and so that was easy. I hated that job, but I went to law school, and then I figured I should do something with it, and then I went to work in education. I don't know if you know that, and so but then making that transition, and then becoming a pastor. My pastor was the Reverend Dr. Jesse T. Williams Jr., who's currently the pastor of Convent Avenue Baptist Church in Harlem, was a social justice preacher, and he engaged the text in a way that spoke to Jesus as a liberator of people, not just from cycles of sin, but from systems of oppression, and that work was a big part of my theological project. And so when UCM convinced me to go to week-long training, and I was trained as an activist, the fire that I think that was probably started in me when I was in Monmouth was stoked again, rekindled, if you will. I don't know, just haven't been able to stop. There's a bunch of these pictures that are here at various different kind of protest things. You can see there's one in here where, this one right here, actually, if you look over my right shoulder, 2 people back, that's Cornell West, which is kind of cool. It's like my full circle story, because I met Cornell West at Monmouth, and then here we are again in Ferguson together again, which is kind of pretty cool to me. And then the guy over my left, Starsky Wilson, he was of course, as a result of this, the Ferguson Commission was formed, and Starsky over, I guess that's depending on how you're looking at it, the guy with the tassels or the thing over his shoulder. Anyway, Starsky was the chair of the Ferguson Commission, which I think our work did a big job in terms of making that happen and getting some meaningful systemic change in the area. And Cornell went to jail this day too, by the way. So.
Thank you, Charles. I love that we're having a lot of chat and sharing emails. That's so great. We do have, if Regina's still available, we do have a question from Charles Courtney. What programs are planned for the new center? Regina, are you there? Can you speak to that?
Yes, sorry. So just as Jeff alluded to, we have the Sophia project, hopefully, that will kick off in the fall. We right now are working on a couple of different things. The first, and I think I mentioned it when I spoke to Desiree's question, we've started the Men of Distinctions program for our Black men on campus, and that will be based out of the center. Charles has served as a mentor in that program. Currently, I am working with some of the psychology professors, and we are working on a Women of Color program as well to help support our marginalized women on campus. We have specific things happening in the way of our Latino students for support as well. I know that most of the fraternities and sororities, particularly the sororities, have started to implement DEI positions within their chapters. And so I have worked a lot with those groups the past year, but I know that that will intensify moving forward. So the center is really supposed to help centralize some of the equity and inclusion initiatives across campus. I think everybody was very tired of working in silos. And so this allows a focus point and a spot for people to go and know that that's where those resources are. So it's ever changing, and I'm super excited because we have a great, right now we have a great team of interns, student interns that are working and, helping to move the needle forward with the dedication ceremony that's coming up in April. And already looking ahead to things for next academic year. So those are just a few things. We're very open to suggestions. Jen and I feel like we come up with something new to engage alums to the center or to the activities we do almost every day. One of us is bouncing something off of each other, or something is coming into our lap to engage the fuller campus in that response. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Regina. That's great. I love that collaboration. I think that there's a lot we can do across campus and with our alums for our students and for the greater community. So it's been a joy to work with you. Monmouth is lucky to have you and everything that you do. Also, I can say that to Jeff. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up. And also, Charles, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your experience. It was so impactful and powerful. I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us as well. Our next virtual event is March 30th. It'll be at 6 o'clock, and it's a discussion about climate change. Also save the date for Scots Day of Giving on April 6th. That's our 18-hour and 53-minute fundraising day. It's our biggest fundraising day for the Monmouth Fund. We also have a fund that supports the diversity and inclusion work called the Champion Miller Fund, which we'll be supporting on that day. And if you went to Monmouth and you love tartan, it's also National Tartan Day. So it's a great excuse to wear your tartan and connect to each other. And as I will remind you, we have a short survey. So please, if you have ideas for programs for us, for alums, for students, let us know. We are taking these ideas, we're working across campus to make them happen. So we would love to hear from you. So also many, many thanks to our presenters. Thanks to all our participants for taking time out of your busy week to join us. And I hope you leave inspired and ready to be a change agent. So everyone have a wonderful week and stay well. Lots of thanks coming in. All right. We can't hear you. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to end. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.